So hey, greetings citizens, Justiguy has arrived. So really quick here, when I started recording this, I did not think it was gonna be as long as it was. I figured, okay, I've written a lot, this is probably only gonna be like, maybe 20 minutes, and as you can see, it's not. It's significantly longer than that. Now you might wonder how I didn't know that going in. Well, when I do my scripted videos, I like to record the whole thing in one sitting, so I don't know what I'm going to do yet specifically, but probably just expect gameplay footage. I don't know, I don't want to talk too long. Also, I am going to avoid using footage of mobile games and such, because I feel like that would just be, at least for the purposes of this video, promoting the very thing I'm speaking out against, so yeah, none of that. That's all I gotta say, so that's that. Anyway, thanks for stopping by, won't keep you from watching, and yeah, farewell. Greetings, citizens! Justiguy has arrived. Good news for all of you out there who have always dreamed of taking advantage of your fellow human. According to the ESRB, loot boxes and the like are not considered forms of gambling. Lucky you! Now, it probably seems incredibly hypocritical of me to touch on this topic, given that my channel, as of late, has focused heavily on free-to-play games that are built on gacha systems, games that the likes of which were what likely helped lead to the rise of the loot boxes that we see today plaguing games. However, the fact is, as I've said many times before, I loathe microtransactions, I loathe gacha, I loathe loot boxes, and I'd happily trade topics to talk about and those games away for a world without all of them any day. So let's talk the ESRB and loot boxes. I'm sure plenty of bigger YouTubers than I are going to be touching on this subject, so rather than dive into things that I'm sure they will, be it the CSGO debacle and its ilk or whatever, instead I'm just going to touch on this subject from my perspective. And one thing I think many of these folks may not touch on is the perspective of mobile games, mobile gamers. You know, those free games, the people who play free games. Those games that have the same or similar loot box concept, or mechanic, if you will. The mechanic that those of us who play these games will typically call gacha instead. Gacha coming from the sound a capsule toy makes when you open it, or when you turn them, I believe. I'm not sure which it was, but these games are very popular and I think even originated in Japan. It's a long story and not what we're here to talk about. Now, our God-given savior Jim Sterling once said in a video that the cost of free games is having to put up with such predatory tactics. Now, admittedly, perhaps I've misinterpreted what he meant by this, but taking it at face value, I can't say I agree with that. And generally, despite how much of a hypocrite I know it makes me, I do happen to thank God for the man every Monday, as every gamer should. And in general, I agree with him on most issues as far as the gaming industry is concerned. This one, though, perhaps it's because he's been in the trenches of it, because he's seen that the battle is lost, but to me, I almost feel like he's being too soft on the mobile side of things, too forgiving towards the free-to-play mobile titles that have been filling up the App Store like a cancerous zombie outbreak that's long since wiped out anything that could stand against it. Although, if that were the case, I guess that would explain why he's not, but, never mind. With all this in mind, let's get started. Naturally, I should probably get us back to the beginning now with this inane prologue out of the way. According to the ESRB, loot boxes and their kind are not gambling. This naturally begs the question, that's why we're here after all. Are loot boxes gambling? Are loot boxes gambling, you say? Now, while the gacha world of mobile games isn't exactly the same as the loot box world taking over full-priced console titles, they are essentially of the same breed, and I think both should be given the same treatment and dealt with accordingly. And it should have happened a long time ago as far as I'm concerned. And given that whatever audience I do have is probably coming here from one such game, let me go on to clarify this. Whether or not you think they have a place in gaming, whether or not you like them, whether you feel they're not intrusive, whatever you feel about them at all. As far as this simple question is concerned, as far as are loot boxes gambling is concerned, is the sky blue? Is Sonic a hedgehog? Yes. In my opinion, yes. I believe the phrase Jim Sterling used was functionally gambling in his Shadow of More Dollars video, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on either the video or the phrase there. Also, before I go forward, and so I don't need to say it more than once, since I feel there's some differences in opinion on this, just so it's clear, when I refer to microtransaction, I'm generally referring to the type of transaction where you buy fake currency and end up using that to buy something in the game, and more often than not you gamble. See, I don't even know what other word to use there besides gamble, instead of buy in the proper sense. I say this because I've seen the word microtransaction also applied to just general DLC before, so I wanted to clarify before I went on so I didn't mix anyone up. Anyway, moving on. Now, in theory, when you buy a loot box, when you partake in any type of gacha-like microtransaction, really, what you're doing is no different than, I'd say, buying any of those scratch-off lottery tickets, especially with the ones that have guaranteed prizes on them, even if it's just, like a buck or a try again. And speaking of scratch-off tickets, just compare them to these games, to loot boxes even. They're flashy, they're colorful, the text stands out, they're designed to lure people in, to draw their eyes in, they use prizes and money as bait. The bunch of them literally are presenting themselves like the very thing that is considered gambling. You really just can't get around any of that. Thus, at the very, very least, I say you should treat this and rate all of this accordingly as if it were simulated gambling. And it's simulated gambling that costs real money, mind you. And that's only if you really can't call it the real gambling that I say it is. And that's not even touching on instances like Pokemon having to flat out remove the slot machines because it really was just genuine simulated gambling that did not use real money. It almost feels like so long as we let these companies just pretty this stuff up, make it look like anything other than what it is, gambling, then they can just get away with it without being called out on it. In fact, I'd say that's exactly what it is, because these publishers, the developers, they're not even hiding the insidiousness of it anymore, they're just glorifying it, if anything. In fact, in an interview with Kotaku, in discussing the Overwatch loot boxes, Blizzard explained that they wanted the loot boxes to be like Christmas. They made the process of opening these loot boxes like that of opening a present on Christmas morning. Flashy, exciting, so that every time would have that magic. In other words, here, you can literally buy Christmas morning. They want their loot boxes to be like Christmas morning. They dress them up and give them a special opening effect, purposely so that people can get hooked on that happy feeling. They're trying to recreate that magical moment, and they were very open about it. Just think about that for a minute. Let the implications sink in, and if you can't think of any implications, think about it for another minute. Because sure, that sounds nice on paper. But what they're saying is that they're literally trying to sell you the feeling of Christmas morning. Except here, the thing is, Christmas morning, the thing that makes that special is that it is Christmas morning. It comes once a year. Here, rather than having to wait a year for next Christmas to have that magical moment come again, they're saying, hey, give us more money and here, we'll give it to you again and again and again and again. And so rather than waiting for the next year when you get a disappointing present, you can just try again now. You can keep trying, in fact, over and over and over again until you get the Christmas that mommy and daddy failed to give you. Thanks, Blizzard! There's no shame in it. There's not even a need. People are being brought up with these mechanics, these features, these tactics. And I know people will defend them. Hell, we're going to be getting people raised on this corporate wallet-sucking logic. People who will go on to become developers who not only defended this stuff, they'll be developers who think this stuff is how games are supposed to work. And this, citizens, is the segment of our program where we give a moment for you in the audience to voice your complaints. So let's just give you a moment to do that now. Okay, done. All right, let's address those. Oh, but Blizzard couldn't possibly want their audience to buy those things. They wouldn't be doing that in the hopes of them actually spending money on it to lengths that they shouldn't, right? Oh, but they need that money. They couldn't possibly maintain Overwatch if they just sold the content as normal DLC, right? Yeah, don't do that. You bought a thing that may or may not let you win another thing. You have exchanged money not for a guaranteed product, but for a chance to get something you want, and typically with a much greater chance of getting something you don't. In the case of most, if not all, console-based games with loot boxes, you don't even get to see what your chances are. You have no idea what the odds are. You could be playing a rigged game and not even know. With many mobile games, meanwhile, you have to deal with ridiculously low odds that you do know. And sure, that seems great on paper, but if you want to see how that turns out, just search for videos of pulling and drawing and see how much money and time gets spent by players who want one thing. Can you really tell me, watching those videos, watching these players spend ludicrous amounts of money, that is not gambling, that there is nothing similar there to people sitting in front of slot machines? I would seriously like to know if the ESRB has seen any of this, if they have watched any of the players who are actually being hurt and manipulated by these predatory tactics in action. I'd like them to sit down and watch these poll videos to see players throwing away money and often not even get the thing they were chasing after spending hundreds and hundreds in a matter of minutes. And unlike with trading cards, you could have absolutely nothing to show for it. With trading cards, if you spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on booster packs, guess what? You would at least have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of bad cards to sell or do something with afterwards, because they're trading cards. That's how they work. You trade them. That generally is not the case with these kind of games. So tell me, how is any of that different than if I were to go into a casino, spend money on a video poker machine, and then just leave after I lost?
But wait,
The ESRB says,
you still get something in the game, it just wasn't what you wanted.
and here's the thing. Many developers have thought of this, and they've prepared loopholes. Take Fate Grand Order. Once you have 5 of a given card, any after that are essentially worthless to you. The game doesn't let you do anything with them beyond trading them in for a minimal amount of in-game currency, which only serves to feed the game's own in-game economy. Essentially, what happens is I lose at the machine, but I get a coupon for $2 off my next visit, because I don't get something that I can take or sell anywhere else. And should that casino shut down, then, well, the money and time I spent in there is gone forever. I mean, hell, that includes the stuff I won, too. It's not like with, what did you say, trading cards, was it? It's not like with trading cards, where even if they stop making the trading card, I still have, the trading cards after the fact. With these games, when they shut down, generally, that's it, they're gone forever. So, at the very least, I would say the system is similar enough to virtual gambling for it to be considered, well, virtual gambling. Heck, even simulated virtual gambling. Certainly enough so that regulations and warnings or something are in order, don't you think? Perhaps ratings being changed in order to accommodate? Someone overseeing the games to make sure they're not too predatory or manipulative? Perhaps even mental health groups checking over every single instance of this bile to protect people from it? No? Not good enough? Alright, well, I'll keep going, that's cool. Let's talk about lottery tickets and sweepstakes. Are these gambling? What are they? Well, whatever they are, there are similarities in both instances to the loot box and gacha systems plaguing games. Perhaps not one-to-one similarities, but both systems have rules, they are regulated, they involve people either spending money or entering, and they can win or not, and so on and so forth, and the point is, care was taken to make sure that abuse was avoided. Well, at least supposedly, but that's a totally different topic. My question is, why can that not be done here? Why is it that people can just spend ludicrous amounts of money, not get anything out of it? This happens over and over and over again, and the only response is, oh, it's like trading cards, so it's fine. If this is happening, and it is happening, does what it's called matter more than doing something about it? If it's not gambling, by whatever that definition is now, could it not be that just the definition needs to be changed? Alternatively, if it's not gambling, yet it's getting people to spend ludicrous amounts of money as companies push out products that alter how people's brains work, is it still not something that deserves as much scrutiny as possible? If you ask me, loot crates and all forms of microtransactions are absolutely gambling. Meanwhile, while the ESRB wants to go to this trading card defense, I'm honestly kind of inclined to think maybe trading cards do kind of lean in that direction, but at least again, as I've mentioned, trading cards have a physical product that you have complete and total ownership of. This, however, is not and never will be the case for digital products that we are dealing with now, and we have seen that time and time again. This is an entirely different ballgame, and it needs to be addressed as such. I will say that whether it's earned through an in-game loot crate, whether you're using the free currency that the game provides you, or whether you're using money, I firmly believe that this entire system is indeed gambling. It promotes gambling, it creates and reinforces bad habits and behaviors, and it just sucks people in. Gamers have often been known to cry out against calls such as this because they come from the sucker moms or whatever the modern equivalent is, because people are trying to censor the games, oh no, and all that garbage. But to those of you who believe this, to those of you who sit there and think, as long as it doesn't affect my gameplay, why should I care? Or, it's not like I pay for it, or any of those stupid equivalents. You can't do that. Those of us speaking up are not soccer moms. We are gamers too. We are on your side. We're not just on the side of games, but perhaps even more importantly, not to sound too extreme here, but we're on the side of our fellow person here. When a person becomes an addict, when they are screwed up by these devious tactics when they are introduced to a person's mind, and when a person allows them to be reinforced and keeps coming back to them, which they do with these games whether they pay or not, they get seriously screwed up. This can't be allowed to become normalized any more than it already has. Not punishing those who push this onto children, like dealers, not punishing the companies that supply it for the unsuspecting, not saying anything, just accepting it. Yes, I know, I'm a hypocrite, but I'm gonna be a hypocrite that at the very least won't forget to keep yammering on about how wrong it is. The masses have accepted it. Kids are growing up with their first games including them. It's reprehensible, guys. It's not cool. Worse still, because of how these games implement these features, coming off as colorful, friendly, sparkling, shiny, eye-catching, just all endearing, because of how they oh so knowingly get the players on their side, because of how they make it so these gamers would rather turn on those who get sucked in and spend too much time and money on them, rather than the developers who are abusing every one of them whether they pay or not. So many people who should see it as a problem just don't. Quite the opposite. Just because free-to-play games don't cost a price doesn't mean that they should be allowed to be so aggressive, so manipulative, so underhanded in their approach. Just because you don't have to do this and all these excuses, that doesn't mean it should be that way. That doesn't mean it's okay. If something's not okay, even if it doesn't seemingly affect you, that doesn't mean it's not affecting you, and that doesn't mean it's okay. It's to the point that the only reason I'd argue gambling wouldn't be the appropriate turn from what's being done here is because it would be more appropriate to compare these practices to pushing drugs. I mean, hell, take something even as mundane as Nintendo's little badge game on the 3DS. Yes, the one with the little funny bunny, that one. Now, I've got some criticisms for this little minigame, but as you can imagine, Nintendo fans world over would have my head over it. But even something as trivial and seemingly inconsequential as this has a lot of the problems that loot boxes do at its core. It invites you in with its cute mascot, it gives you a daily free trial, and then you get to play a little game, maybe win. Of course, you can pay to try again, and it leaves the things as you left them if you lose, just teasing you to pay to try again, maybe again and again and again, before everything resets tomorrow. And of course, a lot of this is only here for a limited time. But think about what it actually is. Instead of just letting you buy the decorations you want, you have to pay for the chance to play to maybe get them. It even decorates the minigame itself, like the capsule toy machines the gacha system is based off of, but does that really make this better? Does that really make it acceptable? And by the way, in the badge arcade, you actually can indeed lose and get absolutely nothing, even if you spend money. So does this mean, with the definition the ESRB is using, that Nintendo's badge arcade is gambling? And that's not to say anything about anything else we're talking about, just that according to the definition they are apparently going by, the badge arcade apparently is gambling. Huh, what do you know? Why is it, when digital products should never have a problem with supply, developers and publishers have become allowed to push consumers around in ways such as this? Those of us who experienced and remember past generations of games may be critical of these practices now, even if we're having to accept them in the free-to-play market. But here's the thing, we're not the only people playing these games. Not by a long shot. All of these free games, all of these paid games with microtransactions, these games, they're bringing up the next generation of gamers. The people who weren't playing games when we were, the people who weren't even alive when these practices weren't the norm, that's the next generation. And I know I'm repeating myself here, but this point is such a big one for me. Because right now, there are children who are old enough to start really thinking about how making video games might be the career that they want to pursue. And the thing is, they might never have even touched or seen a game without this model in it. Some game with a free-to-play model, microtransactions and all, that's gonna be the Super Mario World and the Sonic the Hedgehog for some developer of tomorrow. The idea of paying to skip boring parts of the game, the idea of there being tedious parts of the game that are just there to really, at their core, take up time that you can pay to skip, while today's developers and publishers really just put that in there, to get you to pay to skip them. That's going to be something that people are going to, in the future, look back on and have nostalgia for someday if we're not careful. And then, when that all becomes the norm, then what? I'll tell you. You have people who are used to them coming into full games, like Shadows of War, not just tolerating that model. You have people coming into these games expecting it. You have little Timmy buying his first console, wanting to be able to buy a box to have a chance at the best equipment right away, like he was always able to on his little phone games growing up, just so he can blast through his new game on his PlayStation 6S squared. What happens when he can't? Oh well, he's not going to want to play that game. That may well be part of how we got to where we are now. Which is why we probably shouldn't have just tolerated it on the phones. It won't just be the developers encouraging a model where games are designed with grinds and chunks that you'll be able to pay to skip. people will want to be able to pay to skip things in games, whether the model is there or not, because that's just what they'll have come to expect. We'll find ourselves part of a generation of an older mindset, citizens. It may well be that these companies are becoming more and more blatant in these practices because they've realized they can just play the long game and win with very little effort. Jim Sterling recently suggested that they've become so aggressive with these tactics because he feels they're running out of time with them. But as I see it, it's the exact opposite. These companies, these publishers, they're winning and they know it. I mean, though I already have, if I may go off on a bit of a tangent here, that's how I started finding myself drawn to mobile games in the first place. The big console games have been feeling more and more like chores. Chores jam-packed with vacuums and laundry baskets, tools that I might need to buy to make things easier. And chores set up that at their core, I need to have to buy those tools so I can order to fully appreciate completing the chores. Okay, that probably isn't the best analogy. But I just don't have the time to invest in these giant super new AAA games anymore. It's really hard now to find a good time on its own, and now even proper handheld titles are becoming huge investments. Thus, I've fallen into the trap of mobile games quite handily. Pick up, play, put down without any stress, and lose a little more of my soul as I go on with life. From Nintendo's polished Fire Emblem title, which has made so many people willing to gamble money away to support the developers, because Nintendo really is so desperate that they need to be supported by creating gambling addicts and all, to the likes of the increasing number of tie-in titles that get people to gamble over what are often the exact same game but with different characters on the cover. Transformers, Dragon Ball, Marvel, hell, some franchise have more than one of these going on at once. Namco's Tales franchise has like 3 right now, and they've still got people throwing money at them because they're just poor developers in need of support. Don't get me wrong, as I've said more than once, I'm a hypocrite myself for playing these very same phone games. And I mean, the fact is, they've gotten a lot nicer looking than most 3DS games now, and those, meanwhile, are, like I said, a huge investment. In a way, that's perhaps a big part of the whole scheme here. On one end of the spectrum, they're making these huge games that a lot of people don't have time for. Shouldn't have time for, because a lot of what they've put in is just meaningless. It's an unfun grind, and then they give us a way to gamble for a chance to take away the grind so we can get to the fun part. On the other end, you have these endless games on your phones that just seem to exist in their own little worlds, fueling themselves with time and money spent by players of all kinds, those who pay and those who don't. And at the very center of it all, of this entire spiel and tirade, of stamina meters and every other insidious thing mobile games and microtransactions have spawned, we have loot boxes. Are loot boxes gambling? I do believe they are. And if they aren't, given all the consequences, given the clear abuse of them, does that still mean publishers deserve a pass? And if we really need to get into comparisons with quote-unquote real gambling, while I am not an expert and I do not claim to be and do not intend for any of this to be taken as gospel, I have done a little research into the subject for the sake of this video, and it does seem like microtransactions, gacha, prize crates, loot boxes, and the works do actually match up reasonably well with what's considered a Class 2 slot machine. Now, again, I'm not an expert, so if you are, if anyone out there is, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm totally wrong on this. But for the purposes of this video, what you need to know, and what my understanding is that there are multiple classes of slot machines that cover different types of gambling. Among them, there are Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 slot machines. Class 3 machines respond based on player input. There's RNG involved, but there's also strategy involved as well. Supposedly. In theory, any good player could win any given game. Now, this is not so for Class 2 machines. It's all predetermined as soon as you start your game. No player input can change the results. This is much like when you might, say, open up a loot box, summon a new character in a mobile game, and so on. Yes, you can still argue that there's that whole,
but you still get something out of it.
Well, this isn't universally true across the board, and more to the point, as I mentioned earlier, many games have loopholes that make it so that they can essentially give you nothing while still giving you something. Because sure, you can trade whatever it is in for some of the game's in-game currency, but as I said, it's generally the equivalent of trying to win a sum of money and just being given a coupon for a couple of dollars off your next try, if you even get that much. It's not at all comparable to still getting something. But you know what? Okay, fine. Let's say that, for the sake of argument, loot boxes and all that really are just akin to trading cards. Just for the moment, just for the sake of argument. In that case, let's go back in time. 20 years to be exact, back to the Pokemon craze of old, back when baseball cards were still a thing, before Yu-Gi-Oh!, before Hearthstone. Remember those times? Were you even alive? God, that makes me feel old. Anyway, when the trading card craze was seemingly at one of its last peaks, attorney Alan Hawk, who had been following the trading card issues since the 80s, had seemingly become known for taking up cases against trading card companies after his own son got entrenched in their products. Admittedly, while I don't know what happened with the cases themselves, and let's face it, no matter who is right or wrong here, a bunch of parents and anyone else suing companies like Upper Deck or Nintendo, well, that's really not going to go anywhere. But I can say that as I've understood it, and I'm not trying to make this out to be gospel, but because it is hard to find stuff from this long ago, so if anyone wants to correct me, please do. I would love to know more about this. I really, really would, and if I'm wrong, I'm open for that. But anyway, from what I've gathered, in 1997, Federal District Judge Rudy M. Brewster, upon dismissing Upper Deck's motion to dismiss Hawk's case, had this to say about trading cards. Whether the piece of cardboard contains lotto numbers, scratch-off boxes, or the face of Michael Jordan, it is still gambling. And I'm sure then and in the 20 years since, this has come up a number of times, and there have been other opinions. But, at the very least, if that's accurate, as far as trading cards are concerned, there's something akin to precedent. Admittedly, nothing major that I could find, but if multiple motions to dismiss cases were being dismissed themselves on top of a judge giving this opinion, well, I think that's something. But maybe that's just too old, not recent enough to bring up. Well, additionally, in a much more recent interview with AddictionPro.com, Michael Smith, the co-founder and CEO of Chapter House Sober Living and Counseling Center in Dallas, Texas, spoke about some of his first experiences with addiction, which included trading cards, and how there hasn't been much acknowledgement or even research into whether or not trading cards are gambling or addiction. So in that respect, you could make the argument that saying that these are trading cards doesn't actually say anything about the subject. In his interview, Smith says that when he was dealing heroin in Portland, Maine, he got to telling people, go to the local card shop and buy sets of cards instead of giving me money. He'd give them heroin for cards. He also says that while he hasn't recently seen examples of the behavior in his clients, he does sometimes hear about colleagues referring to patients as collectors. Smith, someone who I'd say knows a lot more than most of us about this sort of thing, says that the feeling he experienced around acquiring trading cards was very, very similar to the casino experience. He says it got out of control for him. He says that while he believes that the card industry always capitalized on the gambling aspect of a buyer trying to land the big hit, there's just little to no acknowledgement of it within the field. He even says that we don't have a full grasp of whether or not, or how extreme behaviors around collecting this stuff might predispose us, us young people, to problems and how we adapt to or process addictions, addictive behaviors, all that. It's an area that just hasn't been thoroughly researched. And this, again, was an article not from 1997, but last year. So for the ESRB to come around and say, oh, it's like trading cards, when it hasn't really been decided whether or not trading cards are gambling, whether or not they're addicting, I'd argue that really is then irrelevant. I'd almost say that if they're going to pull that, then it's fair to turn around and say, well, okay, then you go out and fund the studies and all that to definitively say once and for all what trading cards really are. Why not do that? Settle things once and for all. Even so, fine, maybe they're not trading cards either, or they are. What then? Okay, big shot. In that hypothetical scenario, or whatever you'd call it, where they're not gambling and they're just trading cards, even then, does that still mean all of this doesn't deserve some kind of look, some kind of regulation, some kind of interference? Does that still mean these predatory tactics should still be considered acceptable, should still be allowed? And while the fact that we can say, think of the children here, and it would be a perfectly valid argument, I say it would be just as valid to say, think of the everyone, too. Really, just think about some of the tactics these games use to get you in the door. The supposed features. Most of them will have their own special pretend monopoly money that you can use to buy in-game goods. And sure, on its own it would be fine. Most games have, gold and stuff, except you can buy more of that monopoly money with real money. But when you start the game, they'll be happy to dole it out to you. And so when you run out, maybe I'll want some more. Of course, by the time that happens, there's been a disconnect with the player, because it's not $5 by that point, it's 2,000 magic bucks. And look at all the things you've been able to get with 2,000 magic bucks. Oh, and if we're talking about a free game, let's not forget that you probably can't even play it as much as you want. But don't worry! Maybe there are some items you can use to refill that stamina bar so you can play some more. They'll give some of them to you for free so you can get a taste, let the early part of the game not cost a lot of it so you can get hooked. Oh, but you'll definitely need it later on. Maybe they'll make you pay some magic bucks to buy more of those items. And, heck, you know what? Maybe they'll just let you give the magic bucks directly to refill the stamina bar. Cut out the middleman, make things easier for you, the player. They'll also have events. At first, you might think of these things as fun. You'll think that they're designed to keep players like you engaged over the course of a game's lifespan. And while you go ahead and think that this is good for a video game, that it means that you'll have more content, more things to do, more game to play, they'll keep it up with limited time items, limited time events to do, events that require you to be playing at certain times or to come back after a certain amount of time has passed, regardless of how much stamina you have left. Oh, but they're not training you. They're not helping move your brain along into becoming more compulsive. They're not at all subconsciously leading you to plan and schedule your life around this game. After all, you must have already begun to do that when you knew you were going to be smart and never have to pay to play the game. You weren't going to be a sucker and have to refill your stamina, no stir. So you started up a stage right before you went to bed. That way, when you woke up, it looked like you had a free level to play. Weren't you smart? And so you smart old you got as close as possible to leveling up right before a new set of story levels came out. That way, you could rush right through them as you leveled up so you could have even more stamina to keep playing. Oh, but this isn't altering how you act based on how the game works. Not at all. It's not like you do things differently if the game didn't have you thinking about things like this, right? No. I mean, absolute worst case scenario, the game is being helpful. It's teaching you how to manage your resources. This should be considered educational. Everyone should play these games. They're good for you. Now look, that might sound extreme, it might sound crazy, and it undoubtedly sounds hypocritical given this channel has been thriving something fierce off of the very games I'm tearing into and will still continue to play here. But this is all not only true, it's all stuff I've heard before, and here's the thing, it's all stuff I've thought before at one point. These games, these features, these mechanics, these tactics, they're bad news. They fuck with your head, and once it happens, you either realize it and straighten things out, or you lose part of yourself to them and let them keep taking advantage of you forever. And the fact is, no matter how much shit I'm talking here, no matter how much awareness I might raise with this, I'm probably to some degree in the latter category. Look at my channel. It's not like after this I'm gonna stop playing the games. This is all stuff I know and feel. This is all stuff I've known for years. So I play them, I give in to demons, and so on and so forth. But don't think for a second I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too. I know where I stand, but that doesn't mean I don't know these games are wrong, and I want as many people as possible to know they're wrong. Now earlier I likened the games to drugs in this video, but you could also liken them to alcohol. Perhaps fine in moderation, but bad and potentially deadly in excess. And that might be the best analogy of all, but the thing is, if that's the case, if loot boxes are akin to alcohol, if picking out what color orb you want to pull in Fire Emblem Heroes is akin to picking out what beer you want to drink, if those who pay for them too much are akin to alcoholics, then we need to create systems for that, no matter what they're classified as. We need regulations, we need to create support. People like to grandstand and go on about how we need to talk with our wallets, but even free players of these games, be they games that are free or games that cost the base $60 and have this vile filth slapped on top, all of them are still paying with a very precious currency: their time. These mechanics are inherently designed, whether you pay or not, to screw with the way we spend our time, with the way we view our time, with the way we treat our time, not to mention money. Really, they steal our time in the hopes that we'll cave in to paying them money so we can have more of our time back. These aren't game mechanics, these aren't features. These are companies preying on people, be they children or adults, in order to influence their brain chemistry and turn them into addicts. Prey on those who already are addicts and get them to spend more and more money on their games. The games themselves are often interchangeable, essentially, to paraphrase Jim Sterling here, becoming little more than self-contained, self-serving little mini-economies. Because in these games, there isn't typically a goal in the traditional sense, which I believe is a great indicator that this should be considered gambling, or at least something more than it is now. And just so anyone who normally watches my stuff understands this, no, this is true across the board, people. For example, here is how Fire Emblem Heroes works. Orbs are the game's brand of magic bucks, or in-game currency. Or at least one of them anyway, because, these games just love to get you with a bunch of different items and currencies, so it seems even less like real money is involved, and this game is no different. And players get orbs in order to summon new heroes. Then they use these heroes to play through the different maps, which lets them earn more orbs and level up their existing heroes. Doing this will allow them to summon more heroes. Lucky you can summon your first hero now for free, and doing so will keep you on the summoning screen, so if you want, you can pay some orbs to, keep summoning. And of course, along the way, you'll earn feathers and badges, which will allow you to make your hero stronger. And you know what? Guess what you want more and stronger heroes for? Well, any event in the game, really, it just serves as a way to bait players into earning more of its different currencies. It's just another step in the cycle. Get orbs and feathers to get heroes and make the heroes stronger, to get better at getting orbs and feathers so that you can get more heroes and make them stronger so that you can get feathers, and oh, they add features and polish it up in a nice code of gameplay, man, they do make it spit shiny. But that's all the game is at a base level. The story, if you can call it that, is barely there, and if you want to talk about how, but it's bringing us a beloved Nintendo franchise for free on mobile, well, sure. But this exact gameplay actually exists in other mobile games. It has before this one, and it probably will after it. This justification is what leads to hundreds of IPs having mobile games that play exactly the same so that people spend tons and tons of money on them. Just look at some of these anime and game tie-ins that Japan has out there. Some of them look virtually identical save for the art and characters that players use to do the same exact things over and over and over again. And that's not even touching on how there's the good old stamina meter which runs out, forcing you to either stop playing or use one of the orbs or whatever you've earned or paid for. You get the idea. So now, before I wrap up, I want to address any gamers, any viewers that might have stumbled onto this video and made it this far in. The real gamers among us could sit here and say these things are fine in free-to-play games, that that's just part of the cost of the model, that you need something to justify getting to play a free game. But I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that at all. Sure, there should be a cost for free games. Something. Maybe ads, maybe not ads, but something. But not something that takes advantage and manipulates and literally alters people like these games do. And I don't believe in stuff like it's just cosmetic or it doesn't affect gameplay. Every part of a game, be it aesthetic or free or something you pay for, affects the game's overall experience, even if you don't realize it. Frankly, I'd say you're not giving enough credit to developers, both the good ones and the bad ones if you think like that. Regardless, while we do that, the number of gamers around us continues to grow, and not only that, but they're growing accustomed to and expecting this form of gaming. Through these free mobile games, people become more and more used to these ideas, and eventually, to the point that, yeah, they won't even blink when they see them in full-priced games. So if you don't want to see this stuff in $60 games, you can't give up on the free ones either. This stuff is shady and predatory at its very core. It is designed from the ground up to take advantage of people, whether it's a big game that you've already paid $100 for a limited edition of, or a free one that you just downloaded onto your phone. We should not tolerate this. I am genuinely thrilled that people are starting to stand up and speak out towards microtransactions more and more. But if you really want to do something about it, you can't gloss over one of the sources of this plague. Don't ignore the free games or the phone games because they're free or because phone games aren't real or are already too far gone. If you want to say microtransactions and loot boxes as a practice are bad, and they are, we need to say flat out that as a practice they are wrong, they are predatory, and they need to be stopped or at the very least changed and overhauled or just something across the board. If developers want to make people pay money for content beyond a game's base price, be that base price $60, $40, $30, $15, or even nothing, that's fine. I'm not saying they can't do that. Games are expensive to make, and so many people in the industry are underpaid beyond those at the tippy top. I get that. But this business with microtransactions, with fake currencies, with loot boxes, with gacha, with games turning into one-way economies that only truly benefit the companies, but never the addicts they're taking advantage of or the addictions they're creating. No, that is bad for the consumer, and frankly, it's bad for developers too. So I want to leave you with this. Whatever the ESRB thinks or says, I don't think it really matters what we classify this stuff as right now. Whether it's gambling, preying on consumers, giving them virtual drugs, taking advantage of them, giving alcohol to minors, whatever. Rather than giving it a name, let's make it an analogy. Loot boxes, microtransactions, gacha, all of it. Perhaps, rather than drugs or alcohol, perhaps they're cigarettes. Up until now, those who sell them have been able to get away with promoting them without having to warn consumers about them. Even now, plenty of free-to-play games don't really do much in terms of warnings. Of the ones I play, only Bandai Namco puts up a warning every single time you boot them up. Others will have, the occasional warning, maybe a one-time warning, but none of them that I've seen have that every single time you boot it up, even if you've never paid once. And I've got to say, much as I am against this across the board, I do think that's pretty solid of Bandai Namco in that respect. And for those of you who are too young to remember this, cigarette companies used to be able to sell their product alongside cute cartoon mascots. Yeah, seriously. And I don't mean that Flintstones ad that I'm sure at least some of you have seen. I mean cartoon mascots like Tony the Tiger, Ronald McDonald, kid-friendly images designed really to appeal to the younger crowd from a young age, to normalize their product. all that good stuff. And microtransactions are the same. They're toxic for our bodies, and the people who peddle them have, up to now at least, been able to get away with pushing them with very little in the form of regulation or rules or oversight or anything. I'm using cigarettes as an analogy here, but the fact is, considering how these mechanics often involve luring you in by giving you some of their in-game currency in the game first, enticing you in various ways to make you want more, having you play with and against what you'll need to throw money away for just to have a chance of having. Honestly, I really would argue that it's much more akin to someone pushing drugs than it is cigarettes. Except in this case, we've let giant entertainment companies become the ones to do it to us. But whereas we're seeing legalization of drugs in some cases, the analogy holds much more true to cigarettes, where the tobacco companies did and still do take advantage of its consumer base, regardless of the health risks involved, regardless of the damage done. They, like the publishers pushing these things into their games, see people not as fellow humans, but as sources of money that they can drain and nothing more. However, maybe, just maybe, there might be some hope for us. As far as this analogy is concerned, right now it seems like we are just hitting that crucial stage where more people are starting to show symptoms of the sickness that this causes. Right now, enough people are seeming to wake up so that it's becoming harder to ignore them, harder to brush it off with half-assed excuses like just cosmetic or it doesn't affect gameplay. And the thing is, citizens, if this stuff is in a game in any way, shape, or form, it's affecting the game which you are playing. The experience has been affected. The game has been crafted around it. Why would these companies include it and not want you to use it, for goodness sakes? So right now, maybe, just maybe, if people actually speak up, maybe we can see a change for the better. But you can't not speak up about it. You can't say, this doesn't matter, it's just cosmetic. And you can't say, this is just the price for a free game. These companies don't think like that. Publishers, the whole bunch of them, this isn't how it works for them. They've shown that they won't stop at the things that you think don't matter, while some of us complained, and they're gonna continue to do so. Game development is moving towards a place where content is something you have to pay for, to gamble for, and it's gonna keep moving there. Sure, maybe you don't care that the costumes that used to be in games are stuff you had to download as content, then you had to pay for it, now you have to gamble for it. But what if it's, say, background music? What if eventually they go from getting free maps to maps that become DLC again, and then ones you can only get in loot boxes? Seriously, just give them enough time. I guarantee they'll be able to wait for people to get used to this. You may not care now, but all of these different bits and pieces of games that have been getting taken and turned into things you have to pull for, to pay for, to have to open boxes for, to have to throw money away for in the hopes of getting. These are things that used to be parts of games. Heck, they used to be things you could just buy as DLC, and even that would be preferable to where we're headed now. Predatory tactics like these should not be considered acceptable just because you can trick yourselves into thinking that it's somehow more free than if you had to pay a one-time cost to get the thing you know you want, as if it were DLC or whatever. And again, that's setting aside the fact that a lot of games, back in the day just used to include this stuff, whether it was unlockable or just there or whatever. Think about all of these games with their loot boxes, their gachas, all of it. Would you really still prefer this system if they had the option to just let you selectively purchase the things you wanted without having to buy crates and crates full of junk that you can't do anything with but let sit around? If you had to play for hours and hours and hours to grind up that totally earnable in-game for free currency, if you really believe that, then you've just played right into the hands of these companies. And citizens, I am just a guy. I can't do much. I've never claimed I know much. If anything, it's the opposite, believe you me. I can only share this with you and hope you can be more than me, be better. I'll keep playing these, I'll keep hypocritically making videos about them, I'll keep enjoying them too. Say what you will about me, and no, there's nothing following that, I know it and you're right. The fact is, little mini economies that they are, they've gotten to be fun or quote-unquote fun. They've gotten to be enjoyable and quote-unquote enjoyable representations of the games that I just can't sit down and put the time into right now. But if you can, if you've got better stuff to do, don't play these. Don't support these. Call the ESRB out. Call out the publishers who do this. Don't support the games that do it. Don't let yourself get sucked into the games that try to pretty these things up to the point that you think you're playing a real game when you're not. In any case, citizens, I am Justiguy, and this is farewell.